class, Readings in American History, right? Marcine, that's what she was thinking. So, I'm taking this fabulous Readings in American History class, and we read these great books, and I just finished reading this book, Confederacy is a Revolutionary Experience. You know, you're talking to some educated, sophisticated young people, and they say, really? So what was that book about? What would you say? It was a long way to get to a short question. What's the book about? Yeah, Eric, let's start.
It addresses the sort of complexities and intricacies of the Confederacy and how it shifts from this idea of protecting Southern ideals and the things that we generally associate with the Confederacy from what we've learned, and in the process of becoming the Confederacy moves away from these ideals.
Right, so for the Confederacy to come into being, it has to get away from the ideals that it was created to stand for. Good. What else is it about? Yeah.
You could argue that it's one of the ultimate paradoxes in U.S. history, that the very way of life that the Confederacy was formed to conserve and to protect from the North was the very way of life that they sort of transformed by creating the Confederacy and sort of repudiated it and had this sort of economic revolution, political revolution, social revolution.
You used a really important verb at the start of your statement, and that was conserve. Why did you use that word?
Well, as Thomas puts it, it was a radical means to a conservative end. And I think that's interesting, and that, I mean, even the title itself is sort of a paradox.
Yes.
The Confederacy as a revolutionary experience.
Right.
You know?
So, a lot of times we talk about conservative, and we use it as an adjective almost always. Sometimes as an adverb. We very rarely think of the root of that word as conserve, right? Preserving the past, keeping the past. Right? Stu, what were you going to say?
I think one thing for me was it really challenges what they call the Moonlight and Magnolia perspective of the South. Like when I read that, I just saw Blanche from Golden Girls, and she was talking about the honeysuckles, and she was talking about Big Daddy on the porch, and because we have such.
Wow, that is an extended.
I maybe I was watching at the same time. But I mean, because to me, we have that. We've grown into this mindset of Gone with the Wind, and every single person was like a Red Butler, and every single person was, and this book is like saying, throw it out the window, because that's merely a slice of who the South was.
Very small slice.
Right. And that as many different kind of people who were in the North, it was the same way in the South.
So the mystique
right.
of the gentility of the South.
Yeah, and it challenges you to kind of toss that away and kind of rethink about the South.
Is one, and the other one is the big one that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is states' rights. Okay? So states' rights are vital to understanding the South. And that's about independence and not having the government, put its boot on your throat. Right? You might hear some of that rhetoric today when we talk about the draconian Obamacare. Right? All right, so let's pick up the story now. We've got a South that Emory Thomas has laid out that, at least in the mind of the South, is a little bit of that Moonlight and Magnolias thing, the bosh and nonsense that Claire talked about a minute ago. The stuff that I kind of bucket. So you've got this kind of understanding in the South. And the South goes to war to defend this way of life, this Southern way. All these things, they're kind of thrown in the pot. You've got a start to the war, and he doesn't dwell on Fort Sumter or whatever, right? But he talks about the politics of war. What are the people called who are pushing for war?
The fire eaters.
The fire eaters. Who are the fire eaters? What do they stand for? What do they
They're
stand
definitely not Death Eaters, which I kept having to be like, okay,
Okay.
not Death Eaters, Fire Eaters.
Fire eaters.
Fire Eaters are the people who, they spoke with passion about saving these ideals of the South, and they went to churches and they wrote papers and books, and they got the people riled up.
So they were the rabble rousers.
They reminded me of televangelists.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jason, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, they're the ones that were heading the influence to try and influence others, that secession was the only one.
Right. So they're the firebrands, fire eaters, right? They're the ones, the stump speakers, the evangelist types, whatever. They're evangelizing not for church, but for secession.
For the greater good.
Yeah, well, as they would see it. So, they are.
Not for my greater good.
Well, yeah. So they're the ones with the megaphone, right? And some of them are in formal politics, but most are not, right? You've got newspaper editors, you've got some local politicians, you've got plantation owners and whatnot. You mentioned Gone with the Wind, right? You see some of the fire eaters in Gone with the Wind early on. They don't necessarily make the movie. So you've got this fire eater brand. Yet who winds up being the leaders of the Confederacy? The Moderns. Why is that, Karen?
That's a good question.
Thank
Well,
you.
there's
Help her out, David.
because they're in the military, right? And they're war heroes, and
The strategy.
Right? So you need level-headed people. What do you need to get a movement going? You need Monteith out there barking at you on the street, right? Climbing up on the soapbox. What he's saying is the South is not immutable. The South changes, right? It's a historical place. And because of that, if the South could change before, even if it was unintended change and it was completely contingent on what happens during the war, and it's completely ironic, it's a paradox, right? Even if all that is true, the South can change again. When's he writing this?
1971.
Yeah, he's writing in the late 60s into the early 70s. Let's think about context for a second. What's happening around Emory Thomas at this time? Civil rights movement, right? And who's just been assassinated in 68? Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you, David. Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. has just been assassinated. You see more and more of a radicalization movement in this kind of entrenchment of white reactionary politics. You, in the recent past, had massive resistance in his Virginia, which is where they shut down the school systems to prevent desegregation. You see the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. You see the murder of Robert F. Kennedy. You see lots of murders of civil rights leaders, lynchings, and all these things. And so there's this kind of culture clash taking place. And in part, what he's trying to do with this book is to say, the world doesn't have to be this way. The South doesn't have to be this way. The South can change too.
I struggled with this book because of my own, I'm sure, my own sort of bias against the South. And
I won't take it personally.
okay, good. But because there's this image I have of with all the monuments to these war heroes, and that I'm like, so you lost, right? You lost, so come join us. And I feel, I'm not being very articulate with this, but I struggle to see that the South can change, because I feel like the attitude is that the South doesn't want to change.
So let's we're going to explore that. I'm going to take that point seriously, because there are a lot of people, especially up here in Yankeeville, as I like to call Chicago. There are a lot of people up here who feel exactly that way about the South. That the South is the land of hunting, fishing, and college football, right? And I'm not opposed to any of those. I grew up in Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia. I hear you. I understand what you're saying. So what we're going to explore here is how there's this 4-year period during the war where there is significant change in Confederate society, but then come the Reconstruction era, all of that starts to settle back into the old places. So we're going to explore, and it's fine. If you don't buy the thesis, we can talk about why. Okay, Stu?
To kind of piggyback what you're saying, this is a perfect opportunity. So I don't want to call my sister a fanatic of Civil War because you're filming, but my sister does Confederate Civil War reenactments. My sister,
Really? Okay.
She puts on the gown.
She likes the big hoop skirt.
She does it
and
all.
that
I
stuff?
mean, she's goes to forts. She does it all. And so I was texting her, and I was about
And
to.
she is from.
She's from Florida. She's from
There
the
you
South.
go. Go ahead.
And so I was texting her about this book, kind of she'd be interested about this book. And her first comment was, she goes, "I cannot believe that a school in Illinois would let you read a book of this approach of this potential." She was so floored. How did this get past the southern borders?
The censors.
It's like who leaked this? And I'm like, how interesting that you think that well, that's what this whole class, this book is about. It's there's an other side of the argument, you know, and that don't just see it from the one point of view. But like my sister was just like, I couldn't comprehend that she called the Land of Lincoln would allow a book like this.
Well, you didn't give away the dirty little secret to the teacher.
Well, I know I didn't mention your Southern ties.
It would ruin the.
But you know, like to what you're saying, like, you know, I mean, like I've been to these Civil War reenactments in the South, and if you go there, you would not think that they lost this war. Right? It's like, don't tell them. Everyone keep it quiet. You're gonna be so disappointed. They don't know how the book ends, apparently. Because they do.